looked at using the input box statement from Visual Basic, and we demonstrated that very simply by calling it and entering a prompt and a title and a default response and placing that into a string variable, and then we showed what was entered. We're asking in this case for them to enter a first and last name. We're going to verify that they actually did that, and if they didn't, we're going to continually ask them to enter a first and last name until they comply with the request. And we're going to use a while loop to do that. So I'm going to modify my code here a little bit. By the way, through the magic of video, in between those lessons, I did add the code for the message box demo button. And if you're following along, you're welcome to go ahead and pause and type in that code. But in that button, we simply asked a message box, and then we handled that input as either being yes or no, which would be the else. And we showed two different message boxes in response. So let's look at our demonstrate button here for the input box. I'm going to start by adding some variables. I'm going to have a string of fn for first name and ln for last name. We'll keep this very simple. I want an integer for space lock. We need to find out where that space is located in our string so we can parse it out as first name and last name. And I'm going to have a Boolean value called repeat, and it's going to equal true to start. And that variable will be used in our while loop to determine whether we should keep asking for a first and last name. So let's create our while loop. So our while is simply going to be the value of repeat, and that of course is a Boolean expression, so it evaluates either true or false. I could say while repeat is equal to true, such as this way, and that'd be equally valid. I'll just leave it as that, although once again, just the word repeat will suffice because it is either true or false. And then we need some brackets. So what we want to have repeat within our while loop is what goes in between the brackets. So I'm going to take my input string and cut that, and that's the first thing I want to have happen. So since we're forcing this to occur once by having repeat be equal to true, we're going to ask them to enter the first and last names. Then I'm going to set space lock equal to xyz dot index of, and we're going to look for the space character. Then we're going to do an if structure. If space lock does not equal a -1, meaning it found a space somewhere in the input phrase, so we're going to assume they entered a first and last name. We're going to go ahead and handle that, and we're going to say fn first name equals xyz dot substring, and we're going to take character 0, and the length we want is the value of space lock. And then we'll say ln last name equals xyz dot substring, and here we want to get the value of space lock plus 1, so the character after the space. And we're not going to do a second argument here, so we'll go to the end of the line. That will be the last name. And then we can do a message box. And as we did before in our VB project, we're simply going to say welcome. We'll concatenate fn, and we'll concatenate a exclamation mark. Greetings to you and the whole, and we'll concatenate there the last name ln plus family. And I got an equals here, that should have been a plus sign, and I need a semicolon at the end of my line. Now, at that point, I don't want to repeat this again. They put in a valid statement, so I'm going to say repeat equals false. And so when it comes back up to do the while, this is no longer going to be true, and it'll come and do whatever comes after the curly bracket. In this case, we're not going to have anything after the curly bracket. What I'm going to do instead is add an else here. Oh, I need a semicolon for my false. So the else will handle if it didn't find a space lock. In which case, we're going to provide a message box that simply says your entry was not in the format of first name, so that's one word here, and last name. That's going to be my prompt, and my title here will simply be try again. I'm just going to have an OK button, so I don't need to specify any buttons. We're not changing the value of repeat, so repeat remains true. It will simply repeat the while loop until it finds a space lock and does this true block of code. I no longer want this message box. I'm going to get rid of that. And I've got no errors. Let's see if this worked. So I'm going to click the demonstrate input box, and I'm asked to enter first and last name. And if I just leave John Doe as the default, I'm told, welcome John, greetings to you and the whole Doe family. Let's try this again. This time I'm going to put in Elvis like we did before in the previous video. And I'm told, try again. Your entry was not in the format of first name and last name. Okay. So in the previous video, I put in my dog's name of Serenity, again, kind of ignoring the request here, and say OK. And once again, it loops saying your entry is not in the format of first and last name. And we'll continue doing that until I comply with the request of first name space last name. So we're going to try this again. And this time I will put in George Washington and click OK. And the message box comes up, says, welcome George, greetings to you and the whole Washington family. So that's how our while loop is working. It's forcing us to provide the input that's being requested in the format that it's looking for. We discussed earlier that there's a variation of the while repetition structure, which is the do while repetition structure. Oftentimes we can use a do while instead of a while. And do while, though, is perfect for when we're getting input from the user and we want to verify that it's in the correct format. So I'm going to modify my program here and take out the while loop and use a do while instead. So I'm going to set space lock equal to an initial value of -1 because we're going to use space lock in our while loop, and we're going to make sure that it has some value. I no longer need the bool statement. We're not going to use that anymore. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take our input statement and start off with that. So we're going to get input from the user, and then we're going to check to make sure it actually has a space. So we'll say do the while comes after the closing curly bracket, and what we're going to do is continue the loop until while space lock equals a -1. And then inside my loop, I want to check the value of space lock. And then if space lock equals -1, we're going to provide our message box that was not in the correct format. So I'm going to steal that from down here. And then we're going to ask them to re-enter that string. I no longer need the string declaration, but I do need the rest of my input statement. We've already declared XYZ as string. And with the do while, we do need a semicolon at the end of that structure. So there's our do while. We're just going to repeat the block of asking them to re-enter the statement if it did not include a space. So if it did include a space, we'll take these 3 lines and conclude with that. And I no longer need my while loop, so I'm just going to get rid of that. Here's the same process written as a do while. So again, we're going to get input from the user. We're going to check to make sure it's in the proper format by checking to see if it's got a space. If it doesn't, we're going to tell them it was in the wrong format and repeat having them enter their name. And we'll do that as long as there is not a space in what they enter. Once they do that, though, we're going to come back and separate the first name and the last name and provide the message box. I've got an extra curly bracket here that I need to get rid of. And let's try this. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate the input box. I'm going to type John Doe, and that works. If I type in Elvis, it's going to repeat. Once again, I'll use Serenity. It repeats. And then if I put in Abe Lincoln, that worked. So we did the exact same thing using 2 different formats, one using a while loop and one using a do while loop.